Okay. So welcome everyone. It's great to see everyone here tonight. My name is Margot and I'm a planner, the Natural Resources and Energy Planner at Windham Regional Commission. I also have online tonight John Bennett, who's the Associate Director with Windham Regional Commission. And we're going to be presenting on Act 171 forest blocks and beyond. And John is going to sort of be monitoring the chat and helping with questions throughout. So as we get started, if I'm going to start with a presentation, if you have a burning question that is a clarifying question related to the presentation, then John may jump in and get that question answered as we go along. Otherwise, we're going to wait with the questions for the primary bulk of the answer and question period towards the end of the program so that we have a chance to get through the information. So during the presentation, if you wouldn't mind having your sound muted, that way we can eliminate some background noise. Hopefully my background noise won't be startled when a doorbell rings or something like that. And if you do have a question when we get to the question and answer period and want to just be able to chat, then you can always unmute yourself. If you're also thinking of a question and are afraid you're going to forget it, you can always type it into the chat. And that way we will make sure that we do get to it when we get to that period. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get started. So at this point, can everyone see the main slide? Yep, great. All right, so as I mentioned, we're going to be talking today about protecting forest blocks, Act 171, and moving beyond just the basics of Act 171. Okay.
It will advance.
It will. It's funny, what's on my one screen is different than my. Okay. Did it advance?
Yes, it did.
Success. I love it. All right. So our agenda this evening, I'm going to talk briefly about the benefits of forest blocks, talk about Act 171 and what its requirements were, completing a community assessment, and then integrating forest blocks into the natural resource section of a town plan and building the case for why we want to be protecting large forest blocks. Then talking about identifying goals, policies, and actions in the town plans, and then integrating large forest blocks into other areas of the town plan, zoning, and bylaws. And then the last piece is going to be community engagement, and then resources. And then we'll hit the question and answer period. So as I mentioned, my name is Margot Gia. I'm the Natural Resources Planner at Windham Regional Commission. I also work on the energy. So along with the natural resources, I also work with energy. And I wanted to mention, although I am the primary presenter tonight, I am by no means the only contributor to this presentation. I was able to collaborate with many partners to help bring this information this evening. Other staff, including John, who's here online tonight, and Jeff Nugent, who is a GIS specialist at the Windham Regional Office, have all contributed tremendously to this. The Windham Connectivity Collaborative, one of the subcommittees was a subcommittee of the collaborative that was looking at town plans, and they read a lot of town plans, looked at the natural resources sections, and really did some beginning analysis on different ideas that could enhance forest block protection in town plans. So I wanted to mention that some of the ideas and examples that are coming tonight come from that group. And then the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Community Wildlife Program. They are and have been a leader in trying to promote the idea of Act 171 and forest block protection. into town plans and have a lot of tremendous resources. I'll talk about some of those at the end. So one of the things I do want to mention though, is that they do have a presentation that is recorded online, and I will have a link to it at the end that talks about Act 171 in more detail. And I'm going to be talking about those types of the information in that program, just a little tiny bit, and sharing other information. So I will encourage that those who are interested in this topic go back and look at that presentation also. So about roughly 75% of Vermont is forested these days. And our forests have undergone a tremendous change over the years. We were a primarily forested landscape, then becoming a very heavily cleared landscape for farming and for fuel in the sort of 1800s, and then sort of been seeing a resurgence in our forests up until recent times, when we're now beginning to see a decrease in our forests again as development is happening. But these forest resources are a long history of our landscape and an important part of our landscape. And some of the benefits of large forests, biological diversity, the scenery, providing clean air and water, working forest lands, economic benefits related to recreation and tourism, help prevent erosion and reduce flooding, provide land for hunting, fishing, wildlife viewing, which also provides economic funding into the state, transmit fewer tick-borne illnesses, and sequester carbon. So you can see that there is a tremendous amount of benefits from protecting and having large forest blocks that are intact in our state. So I wanted to show you a little bit about how our landscape and how sort of these large forest blocks begin to change over time, and how fragmentation of the forest blocks slowly creeps in, and sometimes without sort of full awareness of what's happening, because we see it on such a micro scale of year to year instead of over sort of decades. This is an image of a forested block. You can see sort of in the middle of the photo is a large forested block. This is a forested block that is on the Waterbury Stowe town line. This is an image, aerial image from 1962. And as we move, here is 1974. You can start to see inroads of a long road carved into the forest with development along this new road. By 1980, we have additional roads making way into the forest block. And by 1996, the large forest block is now quite fragmented with all the new development from the new roads that led into the forest block. We often think of development occurring on the landscape. Oh, and here's 2007, also showing yet further development, further new roads and subdivisions. So reducing this forest block to a much smaller size. We often think of development in this state as occurring in the northern part of our state, you know, the Chittenden County area, and sort of outgrowth from there. But really, this kind of development is happening, and our forest fragmentation is happening even here in the southern part of the state. Here's County Road.
In Stratton.
Yep, just bear with me 1 second. So this is County Road, 1957. It's in Stratton. And, you know, you can see in the bottom right, this one little gray dot is the one house pre-existing structure that was on this road in 1957. By 1985, we see a little bit more development happening along the roadways. And as we progress to 2004, you can see a scatter shot of development that's beginning to happen. And it's not just following the roads, but starting to make inroads with longer driveways into the interior of the forest block. You know, a lot of this is beginning to happen because as we have developed better technology for power access or internet access, our cars are more, you know,
Capable.
beefier and capable. Thank you, John. Then it allows us to go deeper into these forest blocks, go up steeper slopes than we ever were before. Now I want to show you the same road and show you an aerial version of this road. So if we look at this ortho photo, this is 2000. So really not that long ago. And you can see that there is not, that there is mostly a very large intact forest block in the center of the road structure. 3 years later, in 2003, you can see the effects of what some longer driveways have started to allow, and the forest block is being fragmented, and wildlife movement is starting to be impeded. This is 2019, the same block, and you can see some new developments even occurring along the southern. This is a development that with a U-shaped road happening in here. There's additional development along the interior over here. And so over time, you can see that our landscape is changing. And why is this important? So our landscape often, you know, looks like this. There's a village and there's hillsides that are forested that provide movement for animals. And large forest blocks are really important for many different wildlife species. Some of our species, like a black bear, they require 30 square miles for normal daily movement. Moose, anywhere between 2 to 20 square miles. Bobcats, 27 square miles. Otters, this one kind of surprised me, 15 to 30 linear miles. And I think this is important to note that they also don't stick to one forest block. They are often relying on moving from forest block to forest block. And so movement between forest blocks is equally as important as providing large forest blocks themselves. So if we look at an aerial photo of a landscape, we can sort of begin to look at some of what these terms that I'm using, forest blocks, wildlife connectors, what they mean. So in this image here, the yellowed out sections are our sort of forest blocks. These are the large blocks of, you know, you might think of them as the deep woods. There's a lot of woods and it's a large block of it. But then you're going to start to see these smaller islands of forested area. And these smaller islands are really important. They're connectors, because how would a bear get from the left side of the screen to the right side? They would have a lot of open land and roads to cross. So this block in the middle, this connector, is a really important cross piece. And you can see where the circles are that there's forested strips between these different forest blocks that allow movement of wildlife to transport between these large forest blocks. Okay, so in June of 2016, Act 171 was signed into law, amending Vermont planning statutes to help communities focus specifically on planning for forest and wildlife resources. And the planning work that comes out of Act 171 is aimed in large part at finding ways to identify important forest land and habitat and managing those areas for long-term ecological benefits. So the planning provisions set out in Act 171. So Act 171's goal said to manage Vermont's forest lands so as to maintain and improve forest blocks and habitat connectors. That is the overarching goal that Act 171 set out. And there's a few required elements that are part of that. So one required element of Act 171 is to identify important areas of forest blocks and habitat connectors and to plan for land development in those areas to minimize forest fragmentation. Act 171, as I mentioned, came out in 2016, but wasn't a required element in town plans until 2018. Okay, so looking at some definitions so that, you know, we're all kind of using the same language. Forest blocks, contiguous area of forest in any stage of succession. There can be interruptions in that forest, trails, wetlands, other features. So it doesn't have to just be forest because it's an ecological community and it's all related. Habitat connectors. Okay, so habitat connectors can be land or water. So the water pathways are really important. So our streams can act and do act as connectors, as well as small forested pieces can act as connectors that link patches of wildlife habitat within the landscape. So it's connecting the forest blocks. And sometimes you're going to hear me or anyone use language that, you know, wildlife corridor, habitat connector, those terms are interchangeable and you'll see them used in different ways. So maps, this is another part that was called out in Act 171 and a proposed, so in town plans, there needs to be a proposed or prospective land use map, and that's a required element. Some towns choose to integrate forest blocks into that map, and it should encompass protection of forest blocks through things like resource districts or overlays or conservation districts. Other towns may choose to add little additional maps, often as insets in the narrative, that specifically address forest blocks and connectors. So the map does not have to be a standalone, but any map that's in, you know, there should be a map that includes forest blocks and some protection of them. So the relevant language in the state planning goals, and a quick overview for folks who may not be as familiar with the planning process. These state goals guide the local planning process, and it's a great entry point into Act 171. You know, you can see here that there's new language that came in with Act 71, that's the yellow highlighted. So the main goal, to maintain and improve the quality of air, water, wildlife, forests, and other land resources. And then the specific language that was added to the state planning goals was Vermont's forest land should be managed so as to maintain and improve forest blocks and habitat connectors. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about what is Act 171, why should we protect forest blocks? Again, just sort of an overview of both of those things. And now you're ready to like, okay, we want to protect forest blocks. We want to make sure our town plan is addressing it. So here's some steps that a community could take before you start digging into the town plan itself to give you some necessary and good background information to be able to make a determination about what are good steps for your community. And we're going to talk about each one of these 4 things. All right, so the first place to start is review your current town plan. And the reason I mention this is because sometimes I think we forget that our town plans have a lot of relevant information, even if they don't specifically mention forest blocks or habitat connectors. And so if the town plan was adopted in 2018 or later, it has language in it already that is related to identifying and protecting forest blocks, because that became a requirement starting in 2018. If the plan was adopted prior to 2018, it likely does have information on the importance of the forested landscape. It may not be as explicit as the Vermont planning statutes now require, but it provides probably a good foundation. And so really look through your town plan, become familiar with what's there so that you know what you can build on. Another thing that some communities have chosen to do is something called community values mapping. And community values mapping is something that allows communities to join together to share expressed values and come up with common values that are important to a community. And these values can be around anything. It can be around recreation or wildlife, historic areas of town, important forest lands, important agricultural lands. And the reason that you might want to look at looking at, something like a process like this is that when you start to then dig into your town plan and start making goals and policies and actions, you're able to come back and say, this was a value that our community said, or this is an area of town that showed several areas of high importance. If you look at this map for Cornwall, the large map in the center is the amalgamation of all the little maps, and the darker the color means that there's more than one community value that people identified for that area. The lighter the color means that there weren't values that were particularly assigned, but it starts to show you what's important to your community. Sometimes I think we make guesses around those things, and this is a way to really start to dig in and get feedback directly from a community. So if you're interested in this type of thing, the wildlife program at Fish and Wildlife does walk communities through this and is a great resource. So another thing to really start to look at is determine where development is happening in your town. State planning goals and most town plans call for compact settlement and vibrant village centers. But is that where the development is actually happening in your community? It's good to examine the pattern of development to help understand what's going on. So here's a map of existing buildings in the town of Putney from 1962. By 1997, the red dots show the additional, the black is from the 1960s, the red is the new additions. You can see that there's small scattered development, generally along the roads that are extending into undeveloped areas, some small dense clusters of development. You can see that up in the northeast corner of town. and undeveloped road corridors are beginning to be developed. By 2002, you can see that development continue. There's many road corridors are now nearly built out. Development extends back off of roads into undeveloped, more remote areas. Again, those driveways are starting to get longer, and a few more dense developments, but it's mostly scattered. So it takes more land to support less housing. So here's a case where up until 2002, the town of Putney was seeing very scattered development into the rural areas, into the forest blocks, and not seeing a pattern of compact village development. So it's important to know that this is the type of development that's maybe happening in your community or not, so that you can know where you want to go. So another tool is BioFinder. A BioFinder is going to, this is an assessment tool, and it's using statewide data to focus on forest blocks and habitat connectors. It's a free mapping program that's available online, and it's a portal for conservation biology data. And Vermont Conservation Design, which was a program, they all put their data into this program so that it can be an effective tool for towns to use to look at forest blocks and connectors. There are online tools, both handouts and videos. I'll share a link to those at the end if you want to learn more about how to use BioFinder. So it's a great tool for getting started. It helps look at the overall regional patterns and then can help it look at town level patterns. It's not the final say and doesn't know your community like you do. However, it does give you a sense of how your community connects to the whole region in terms of forest blocks, and then helps you find pattern and places to focus on within your community. So it's a great tool to get you started. All right, so once you've done community assessment, you've gathered data, you've started to really look at what's happening in your community, it's time to start digging into the town plan, because this is where the town plan is a tool for really getting to protect and place importance on things like forest blocks. We can say we want to do these things, and some groups are wonderfully doing it through preservation, but we can't preserve everything. But through our town plans, we can plan for a future that does protect even the blocks that aren't under conservation easements. So the narrative portion of the town plan is a great place to help you build the case for why large forest blocks are important. As an example, the new town plan here, as with many of our region's plans, have built a strong case for protecting forest blocks. And you can see these yellow and green highlighted areas. So under wildlife resources or forest blocks, forest resources, these are all different sections in their natural resource section. The language is very clear, and it's building the case for why we need to protect our large forest blocks and what's causing fragmentation. So this is just, continuing to build that case, more language from the new Fane Town Plan. If your town has an older plan, so older than 2018, and you're looking for some example language that you might incorporate into your plan, Windham Regional Commission does have a sample language that you can adopt or use as a starting point, and it gives a great base for providing for forest blocks. So you can always reach out to us at Windham Regional and we can provide that for you. All right, now we've talked about the narrative section. So the narrative section, I'm not going to say that it's easy, but it's perhaps the easier part of building the case for protecting forest blocks, because it's not requiring us to do anything. It's just saying why things are important, and it's building the case. And often we can be good at that because we're not digging into the change that people are afraid of. So the next step, moving beyond the narrative, identify what goals, policies, and actions will help the municipality achieve its desired future. So one way to think about this is, how do you get from the top priorities down to specific steps a community wants to take to look at its goals, policies, and actions? Okay, so here is Vermont state land use goals. And this can provide, this language can provide a good starting point for thinking about community goals for forest blocks and habitat connectors. So the goal could be forest land should be managed so as to maintain and improve forest blocks and habitat connectors. Pretty broad language, it's aspirational. This is what we want, the big picture. So here's some additional goals. So examples from Act 171. And you can see that these are all specific goals that could be related to protecting our large forest blocks and maintaining them, or maintaining. So, you know, we have them, we want to maintain them. Now we need to take those goals and we want to be able to start to delve a little deeper. We want to start to create policies. So here's a few policies that various towns have created from those main goals. So there are examples from 3 different town plans, and they're derived from forest block protection goals. Wardsboro Town Plan, the first one, it's identifying where development can take place if a parcel is located in an identified forest block. So they're kind of saying, all right, we've said the goal is to protect forest blocks, and now we're going to say that we're going to start identifying where development can take place in that. The Newfane Town Plan, their policy is to avoid fragmentation. So again, its goal is overarching, policies are the next level down, right? They're getting a little bit more specific. The Elmore Town Plan, their policy is to maintain large tracts of forest land with special emphasis placed on higher elevations. So they're starting to say, okay, there's some differences in the town. We really want to make sure there's an emphasis on protecting our higher elevation forest lands. And now we're going to get really specific. We're going to get into the actions. What is the town going to actually do? So you want to determine, you know, what are the specific steps that are realistic in the time frame of the town plan. You know, break these actions down into both accomplishable tasks and slightly more aspirational ideas to guide longer term actions. So they can be a mix of both. So Wardsboro did a really nice job in saying, it went next to their action, they put who was going to be responsible to make it happen. So in this case, they called out the Planning Commission was going to take on this action. And what that does is allows, instead of just kind of sitting out there, it's calling out a specific group and giving them a task. And it's more likely to occur if someone takes it on under their wing and says, we're charged with this, we're going to take it on. Newfane. So if you look at Newfane's, the middle one, they talked about completing an analysis, and it's great to start there. If that's where you're at, actions are supposed to be something that will allow you to move forward. So if you need to start with an assessment or really doing a map analysis of your forest blocks, that's a great action. It's concrete, it's getting you moving in the direction that you want to be. So by the time that your next town plan is ready to be developed, you're ready to go with the next layer. And then Elmore, they already had regulations in place, and it's good to cite them here in the action so that people know why they're important, that the town plan calls for the preservation of those regulations. So there's different types of actions that can occur. All right, so with goals, policies, and actions now determined, it's important now to look at how all of these items work within the context of the rest of the town plan and the town zoning and bylaws. So this the proposed land use map is a required element of town plans. Many towns choose to show important wildlife habitat connectors and large forest blocks on this map. And so we're looking at a proposed land use map for the town of Newfane here. And they incorporated forest blocks and habitat into a resource district in the town. That's the medium gray on the map. The rural district in white shows areas that are committed to development. It's easily accessible to the road system, and they appear capable to be developed. Now, it's not to say that it's going to be developed, or that they might not put restrictions on it, but that they're kind of recognizing that this area is more likely to be developed. Now, I wanted to show you from BioFinder 2 different maps. And this is kind of shows you the kind of information that you can get from BioFinder. The map on the right shows a regional view. So the green outline, the green oval, is the town of Newfane. And this is a regional map that in the yellow, it shows important connectivity blocks in the region. And you can see that Newfane, as it's connected to the rest of the region, shows 2 important things. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there is a north-south band of yellow that goes right through Newfane. There's also some east-west connectors that go right through Newfane that are important to getting over to the ridge line, the Pinnacle ridge line that goes, you know, from Putney Mountain up into Grafton. You also have this connection down to the Connecticut River. So Newfane is actually a very important crossroads for both north-south movement and east-west movement. And if you look at the map on the left, this is the town level map. And you can start to see more specifically where it's showing that there are important forest connector blocks. So again, a great starting point to get an overview of how patterns look in your town and what that might mean for future development and policies. Now, I wanted to show you all right, so you see some orange coming onto this map here. All right, so the challenge now is to integrate all the town goals, and there's a lot of competing goals, into a map that can help achieve future land use planning. So if we go back to this Newfane proposed land use maps, the areas highlighted in orange are critical east-west forest block connectors that showed up on the BioFinder maps that showed east-west linkage to other communities. And you can see that these east-west corridors line up with what Newfane has developed as their rural district. The rural district means that there's less development than the village areas, but there's still, if there's going to be development, it's more likely going to be in these areas, which might cause some issues. It's both good because it's along existing roadways, but challenging when we look at some of the connectors and importance for forest blocks and wildlife connections. So the challenge that Newfane faces, that all of our communities face, because this is not unique, is that it's going to be that, there's things that we will have to start digging into that, what can we do to still promote development where it makes sense, but also allow for some wildlife linkages? Are there some critical pieces of land that we want to conserve? Are there some roadway passages that we can put in to help movement under the, roads? What are some techniques that we can find in these critical areas to help keep passage moving? Okay, so, all right. So now another thing that a town, and this can be very controversial, I recognize that all of these things coming up can be. And so what are some tools, right? We can look at the maps. We can make sure that all parts of our town plan are sort of working together. We can look at our zoning, if your community has zoning. And I'll talk about it in a little bit if you don't. But zoning is a very important tool in saying where a town wants to development to go and where it does not. This Montgomery zoning map breaks down its zoning districts into several layers, and each with its own considerations for development. So it has a Village 1 designation, it has a Village 2 designation that shows slightly different things because one's more residential, one's more mixed use. And then there's the rural residential district. And then it has 2 conservation districts. So it's breaking them down and saying Conservation District 1 is to preserve ecological, cultural, and economical functions of forest blocks and natural resources. Conservation District 2 saying is there's very specific areas in town that, for them, it's forest blocks above 1,600 feet that they're placing real restrictions on. So there, a lot of towns have, and they might not use the same language. There's different language. So each town has a little bit different language, but there are often these different districts. But by breaking it down more specifically, you can really start to look at protecting certain blocks of land. Now, if your town has no zoning, which several of our towns do not down in this region, you got to make sure that you have really strong language in the town plan that would be applied in an Act 250 proceeding. So the language in the town plan makes a difference, especially if you have no zoning. Okay, another idea is subdivision regulations that can be another tool for helping protect forest blocks. This is the town of Warren. They used primary and secondary conservation areas to help determine what development might look like in each of those types of subdivision areas. So primary conservation areas, this is land in flood hazard, meadowland overlay districts, slopes greater than 25%. Secondary conservation areas include the critical wildlife habitat and corridors. And so the secondary conservation areas, which I showed their section here, methods for avoiding adverse impacts. These are different tools that they have to evaluate those secondary, like subdivisions that might be happening in their secondary conservation areas. Okay, another tool that a town might employ, overlay districts. Overlay districts, they're adopted as part of a zoning bylaw. Overlay districts are superimposed over conventional zoning districts to address areas of community interest that warrant special consideration. So I have here a map of Westminster. They have 3 different overlay districts in their town plan that's currently in adoption. They have a historical, they have a historical overlay district, and that's the pink. They have a ridgeline protection overlay district, that's the yellow hatched. And then they have agricultural land overlay district, which is in the green. So they're calling out these specific areas as saying, these areas are very important and have additional considerations over just the rural district that a lot of the town is in. Okay, so another important thing, especially if you don't have zoning, but I think it's important across all town plans, define your terms, because you really want to make sure that, you know, when you're using a term, and especially when you get into the maps, if a developer is coming in and they're wanting to figure out what is allowed and what's not allowed, you want to be as clear as possible so that everybody understands the terms the way you're intending the terms to be used. You want to eliminate the ambiguous sort of terms that are not well defined, so nobody misinterprets them in the future. So Bolton Town Plan did a good job of starting to just outline some of the definitions that they're using for certain important areas, like on their maps, like where mass stands are, or deer wintering areas, or yards is the language they use. All right. A lot of these things are not easy, and it's important to note that once a town starts to redefine like proposed land use maps or zoning regulations, bylaws, there can be a lot of hesitation on the part of many residents in town. Change can be really difficult, and especially if that change is not really understood over the general population. So it's really important to take the community on the journey of education with the town group that's proposing the changes. You know, if you're part of the group that's helping write these sections and propose changes, you've gone through that process of education and learning why things are important and how changing an overlay district can be really beneficial across and benefit the whole town. But the average landowner who's not dealt with this might just be like, I don't understand this, and why are you changing, you know, and telling me what I can or can't do on my land. So take your time, educate the community, and provide resources. It's the best way to be able to, and don't make changes all at once. Take them slow. I just want to show two towns that were successful in making some forest block connection changes into their plans. So the town of Jericho, they created an overlay district, and they built the public trust and provided ways to learn more and ask questions. So you can see here that they provided office hours so that there was always people at designated times available to answer people's questions and learn more. They had a Conservation Commission member there to discuss, you know, what are the resource values and why are they important to the town? And then the planner talked about the changes to the land use plan and what it does or does not mean to landowners in an area. And they were very successful by, again, taking the community along. And then we have the town of Bolton. They redrew their district boundaries. They significantly increased the size of their conservation district boundaries. And, you know, that can be really challenging if they just did it and didn't talk to anybody. A lot of people would be like, wait, that's my land. You're now putting into a more restrictive use. So what they did is they actually, members of different boards went out into the community and spoke with every landowner whose land was in the new proposed larger conservation district. So they just kind of took the bull by the horns and just said, we're going to go talk to everyone and let them ask questions and tell them why we think this is important. And they were able to pass that. There's a lot of resources that are available. I will try to put some of these links. Actually, you know what I will do? Everybody will get a follow-up email from me, and I will put all of these links in a follow-up email. There will also be a recording of this presentation available in case you want to share it with anyone, or if you want to go back and reference something. So I will make sure that you get a copy of all these links. But there are these two resources, Conserving Vermont's Natural Heritage and Mapping Vermont's Natural Heritage, are both available as ebooks and have incredible resources in them for conserving forest blocks. And then this link to the A&R guidance document has a whole plethora of resources available at that link. And here's another book that is available and a link to it, Community Strategies for Vermont's Forests and Wildlife, a guide for local action. Lots and lots of great information. And if you're a more visual learner, there's also these upcoming programs or recorded videos that are available. So the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Community Wildlife Program, they do programming every fall and spring. This spring, they have reviewing your town plan and regulations, lessons learned from a comprehensive review. And they have two upcoming dates, one in April and May. You can register for those. They also have the program that I mentioned at the very start of this, that Act 171, selecting forest blocks and habitat connectors, and then updating your town plan for forest integrity. So those programs are available to watch online. And then BioFinder, both there's handouts and a video coming soon about how to use the BioFinder tool. It's kind of fun to play with, especially if you like maps. It's really fun, but can be a really helpful tool for getting your community started. And here's contact information. So again, I'm the Natural Resources Planner at Windham Regional and can assist your town. We do have some, I will be working with a few towns coming up this spring, and if your town is interested in looking at your natural resources section for forest block connectivity and would just like some guidance on maybe some next steps you might consider, I would be happy to work with you. Please let me know that. That's a project that I'm going to be working on in the next couple months. John Bennett, who again is on this call, he is our associate director, but he's also the municipal planning assistant planner. And he is all things knowledgeable about town plans and is amazing at providing assistance in all aspects of town planning. And then also Vermont Fish and Wildlife Community Wildlife Program, Jens Hilke. He is an amazing resource for sort of providing, things like how to really dig into BioFinder, how do you do a community mapping program, helping you sort of take next steps. So he's also another really good resource. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. I have talked a lot. I'm hoping that maybe some people have some questions. So I'm going to stop talking so I can see you all.
Thank you so much, Margot.
So I think, John, was there anything in the chat that came up? Or?
No questions popped up in the chat yet. I guess it was such a stellar presentation. You answered them all.
Oh, wait, Kevin's got a question. Kevin, yes.
Margo, thanks. Nice presentation. I'm just kind of curious how a town balances what the state tells us for our information with what our locals know. I mean, I kind of feel the state says this is where your deer yards are. This is where your significant bear corridors are. That's easy. But then we get local finer tuned people, and they're not necessarily biologists, but it's local.
Yeah.
But it's important information too. So I don't know, kind of where to lean in that one.
Kevin, that's a really great question. And I think it's a really important one, not just for things like deer yards or areas, but habitat, wildlife crossings along roads. The state has a lot of great data and information from studies that they've done or analysis that they're projecting onto our communities. But that's only one piece of the puzzle, right? The other piece of the puzzle is local knowledge. And it's important to solicit that local knowledge and start to marry it in. And in terms of forest blocks and wildlife crossings and connectors, I think a lot of communities are starting to look at things like BioFinder, and it's saying, oh, we have all these road frontages that have important wildlife crossings. Well, let's start to take the local knowledge. This is that next step. Let's take the local knowledge and start figuring out and maybe doing a little research to figure out which ones are the most critical. Where are the wildlife really crossing? Where are we seeing the evidence of that wildlife crossing? So again, like tools like the state provide us are a great starting point. And I don't want to discount that, but I also don't want to discount local knowledge and local research. I know that Putney has done a great study over 6 or 7 years of studying some wildlife crossings in their town. They looked at some of the overarching information saying where is wildlife likely to cross, and then they started monitoring certain spots. And so that's going to help them gain a much deeper understanding of where are their priorities. And that's where, with the deer yard, those hunters that are out there, they know what they're looking at. And getting and soliciting information from them, that's a part of, even if you don't do a community values mapping, you're still connecting with the community and getting that local knowledge. And it's helping deepen, especially in southern Vermont where we have so much forested land. It's, the whole town might look like a critical forest block, but there's going to be certain ones that are more important than others. And that's where local knowledge is going to start helping you. John, I don't know if you have.
Yep, absolutely. No, I was just going to chime in and say, for example, Guilford's town plan proposed land use map has wildlife connectors or crossings or some such terminology, but in significant part, those were prioritized by the Planning Commission, soliciting input from longtime residents who frequently hunted and knew where the deer crossed, or where they saw fresh signs crossing roads, so they could prioritize which ones were most important. And Marlboro's done an extensive amount of work trying to identify critical wildlife crossings, including of Route 9. So I would just echo and support strongly what Margot said about trying to solicit local knowledge, reach out to folks and try to get some local input from residents who know what's going on out in the woods or along the edges of the roads.
That's kind of what I thought.
Yeah.
Yep. It's absolutely
It's challenging because it means more work, but I think in the long run, what it does is really helps make a stronger case and plan. Looks like Donna put something in the chat here. There are apps that help volunteers in towns to identify wildlife tracks, and scat that can be used when trying to determine crossings. Yeah, so there are resources out there. And And again, so Donna's in Wardsboro, and I know that they've been doing a lot of work to update their town plan to look at wildlife connectors and
Very important.
Kevin?
Yeah, just one thing I noticed, as somebody who spends a lot of time in the woods, avid outdoors person, once you get your first 8 or 10 inches of snow, it becomes pretty easy to find those connecting trails and the movements. I mean, you don't even really sometimes have to get out and get in the woods and hike around. You can drive some back roads and all of a sudden you'll see trails where dozens of deer are heading out of the hills down into the south woods or something to that nature. And pretty quickly after that, they're sealed over. But there are signs from nature,
Yeah.
particularly that first good heavy snow where you can pick up their migration routes. And the
Yeah,
hunters,
that's a good point. Jim, sorry.
Yeah, I got one. Several places and several times we talked about large forest blocks. Is there a definition of that? Is that large defined any place? I haven't been able to find it.
John, do you know?
I'm not aware of there being an absolute number on it, but I think it's common sense, I guess, is what applies. I'm not aware of there being a definition, so large is bigger than small. Sorry, not to be much help, Jim.
So I haven't seen it, Jim. I haven't really, like John, I haven't really seen that defined. But it's definitely it's an ecologically functioning forest. So it's large enough to be able to support the diversity of habitats and wildlife within it that a smaller set of, patch of woods might not be able to.
I suspect if you wanted to try to chase down someone who might try to give you more of a definition, you could try Jens Hilke at the
And yeah,
Community
and I
Wildlife.
can follow up on that and let you know, because I'm curious too. I wrote a note to myself.
Donna here. What, if anything, is being discussed or happening in regards to using the current climate situation in attempts to help conserve these travel corridors and forest blocks?
That's a great question. And I think that we're going to start seeing more and more of that in our town plans and in language related to protecting forest blocks because of carbon sequestration. And, we're going to, right now, I think that there's in the template language that Windham Regional provides, there is mention of climate change and why forest blocks are important to help protect in this face of climate change. And I think we're going to start to see some language coming out more and more. I know that the Vermont, I'm curious to see it myself, the Vermont Community Wildlife Program from Fish and Wildlife has an upcoming program on on specifically this topic, climate change and how to start planning for it. So
I wonder if I forget exactly what the terminology is that's being used for it right now, but carbon credits are going to play any role in this in terms of town planning as well.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see, and I actually am hoping that we can maybe get a presentation down in this region that I can organize. Right now, carbon credits have mostly been applied to very large blocks. And when I say large, I'm talking large blocks, like Northeast Kingdom size blocks of land, and not really relevant to individual landowners who have maybe a couple hundred acres or 100 acres of forest land. But there is some new program options available for smaller parcels for paying for carbon credits. And so I am hoping maybe to get a program coming up. So I'm going to make another note on that, Donna, so that I can look into that sooner than later. Because I think I think that could be a great option for some of our, land conservation groups, like on the Pinnacle or Green Mountain Conservancy, some of our towns that have town forests. They might want to start looking into that and seeing if it's right for them, especially as new models are becoming available and applicable to smaller portions.
Yeah, I can't put my finger on it at the moment, but I do recall seeing that there were efforts to do, if you will, cooperative or collaborative efforts among multiple landowners to more effectively, efficiently secure carbon sequestration credits.
Yeah, there was a model that the Land Trust was involved with in the Northeast Kingdom that just went through within the last year. And that was a cooperative arrangement between multiple, like 10 landowners or so. I don't remember how many. And that's the first in the state that occurred. But there is some new work that's coming out for smaller individual landowners too. So I am available, after today, if you want some assistance looking at your town plan, your natural resources section for connectivity, forest block protection, and just want someone to help look at it and say, what are some next steps? Like, reach out to me. I will put in the chat my email so that you can easily reach out to me. Almost gave you my personal email, which wouldn't be bad, but I'm more likely to respond quickly from actually the work email than I am my home email. So I did put in the chat if you want to reach out to me, and I'll be happy to talk with you. Or if you have further questions, again, reach out and I can connect you either to a resource. I will be, after this, give me a few days, but I will be putting together an email that has a link to the video recording of this, plus all those resource links that I had in the presentation. I will put all of those into an email so that you're easily able to access them. And I do encourage you that if you are, this presentation was kind of looking at Act 171 and moving beyond that a little bit and taking it to that next level. But, a lot of really good information are in some of those email or in those videos from Fish and Wildlife, and provide a really good foundation with different information that I presented today. So any last minute questions before we part for the evening? All right, well, thank you all for attending tonight. And I hope that I get a chance to follow up with more of you and all of you about work that's happening in your communities about protecting forest blocks and, maybe taking the next step in sort of your town plans. So, thank you all, and I will be in touch.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thanks, bye.